How you doing? My name's Mayanna, and today I want to talk a little bit about alcohol and my experience with alcoholism, the consequences, and what was most conducive for me to get better. You know, I had a terrible time with that stuff for most of my life. And let me tell you right now, fresh in my mind are still the days where I would be trying to get sober. And in one case, I was at this place doing community service, which was all good and everything. The only thing was I was feeling sorry for myself and I was mad at the system. You know, because here I was having to try to figure out how to pay rent. Now, I did it all, and I'll go on about that a little bit later. But it's like, I'll just never forget that feeling of almost hopelessness, you know, that sometimes I think you gotta get down so you can build up strength climbing back out. Because, yeah, you know, it was a really tough couple of times there. And, you know, I thought I'd just offer some encouragement. If you're newly sober, dealing with fresh consequences, not really knowing, you know, how many hours you're going to get per week, if you have a job, like if you're still looking for a job, just keep looking. You'll find something. Go to temp places. You know, those are usually great. If you're willing to just, you know, bust a little muscle. Alright, so, excuse me. And, first and foremost, I want to talk about the first time that I ever had what I would consider to be a real drink. And, it was my brother's wedding, actually. I was 13 years old. And, I was a very bullied kid at the time. You know, and I just was in a rough place with it. Because this wasn't just, you know, a couple of kids. This was like most of the grade. You know. Now, there were about 8-10 good people in there, you know, but they couldn't overpower what else was going on. I mean, it's not in their self-interest, so. In any event, like, I just was really bumming, you know, to be like, you know, the village pariah. And, so what I did was I would try to escape in various ways before I discovered this drink. And none of them really could get me over the obsession of how much of an outcast I felt like. So that one day at that wedding, they gave me a little fancy shot glass, crystal with a stem, and it had champagne in it. You know, it's reception. Okay, so this is kind of adult-like, so I sip it. First of all, it's delicious. It's sweet. It's just wonderful tasting beverage at the time. And the more sips I took, man, the better and better I felt. I mean, like, that stuff hitting my system was like a supernova. I just didn't care about anything at that moment. All I knew was I was in this blissful state from something I drank. So, hence a lifelong problem with things. I think that happens to a lot of people. And part of the reason it happens is due to the fact that acetaldehyde in an alcoholic's liver doesn't get processed into acetate. Like a normal person's liver will do that. And that's why they'll have a drink and a half, not even finish a drink. And, you know, their body is telling them that, you know, it's time to start feeling sick. So their liver is like a factory. And it turns acetaldehyde, byproduct of alcohol, into acetate. And that gets processed by your whole system, and pretty soon you stop. But when you have a factory and it has a laid-off worker, the one who's supposed to convert acetaldehyde into acetate, he's on strike, or he's in jail, or he's just not available at this time, on vacation. Just kidding, because it happens that way all the time. Honestly, I think the alcoholics are just born without that necessary mitochondria in the liver. So, what you end up feeling like is this absolute... It's like the highest of highs, so warm and fuzzy, and I mean, like, stimulating in ways and, emboldened me to do things that I would have never otherwise done. And, yeah, it's just a matter of, that was an easy association to make. And, the fact that the acetaldehyde went right up into my brain and made me feel incredible, like I just never quite got over that. And I was drinking more and more, sneaking alcohol from my parents' liquor cabinet, and sometimes it wasn't such a sneak, But everything that I touch on this evening right here is going to be basically elaborated upon later. It's the best way I can put it. So I wanted to talk in general about a few things that I feel are important for people understanding alcoholics, If you're going through a rough time in your early sobriety, this video is for you. Because not only do I know how horrible that can feel, but I also know how to get out of it. And it's usually a bunch of different variables that will add up to you being able to maintain distance from alcohol. I'm not a doctor. I don't intend to treat anybody. This isn't intended to prevent any disease. This is just a matter of me sharing my experiences, things I've read, and things I've lived. Alright, so I want to talk about Alcoholics Anonymous briefly because there's a little bit of controversy out there about it, and some people are really for it. Some people think you can't get sober without it, and that goes to a whole different chain of events. But I think it's important to check out, man, because you don't know if it's going to work unless you actually go. You could go fall in love with it. You could go hate it. You could go half reluctantly. And then you start talking to people, and it's just like, wow, these people and I have something in common, especially when one person shares and we're all listening. It's pretty amazing. The thing is, though, as of late, there's something referred to as being dual diagnosis, which means that not only are you an alcoholic or an addict of some kind, but you also have something else going on. And for me, and I really didn't know that I had this, but I just thought that everything was that melancholy, honestly. It was debilitating. I got into very weird states of mind, alienating people and hiding away, and just, it was terrible. But as we move on to what we're referring to, Alcoholics Anonymous just wasn't enough. And I'm glad I know that now, because I have now utilized a number of different things that help me stay sober. And Alcoholics Anonymous is definitely a part of it. And then there's also the scientific part of it that I just mentioned. And then there's other things that I utilize, like deep breathing and facing fears a little bit at a time. Like, I'd love to do the polar bear thing in New York City one time. Just run into it in the middle of winter. It's supposed to be so good for you, but I've been ending a lot of my showers cold, so that's an example of just pushing myself a little farther. It's a lot of satisfaction in that. Knowing that you can just make yourself a little more disciplined at a time. Which leads me to a different thing, and I was in rehab, and I remember this kid just asking the counselor who was leading the class, he's like, why make your bed? I've never understand that. Why do people tell you to make your bed? Because the counselor just had. And he goes, because it's constructive, which to me is not an answer. It's a very discouraging thing for a person to hear, especially a young person, because it's constructive. It just sounds antiquated and irrelevant. So, I think if we wanted to talk about being self-destructive and then self-constructive, I think the latter is a phrase I like to think of a lot. Self-constructive. Why make your bed? Well, not because it's constructive, but because it's one thing different than you do that day. Keep it real simple on that end, Yeah, and you just do that one thing different, and you'd be amazed at how many things you do different after you give up alcohol. You know? Now, for me, alcohol almost killed me. It wrestled me to the ground like a snake. And, oh my goodness. You know, just looking back on the whole thing, it really had me in its clenches, in its jaws. And I was lucky enough, and it is luck. Two things are essential in recovery: luck and effort. And you can do anything like that if you apply yourself, you know. And you'll kind of like want to do that before some of these yets happen. Like, oh, it hasn't happened yet. And, you know, that was so much more significant and possible for me than I ever thought it could be. I really never thought I'd get busted with drunk driving because they were pretty lenient about that for a long time. And then the worse I got with alcohol, just driving all the time like that, you know, buzzed, seriously buzzed. Like, I mean, I couldn't function without alcohol at that point. So, you know, things like that don't need to happen for you to find out, but they did need to happen for me to find out. I tend to learn things the hard way. And, long as I learned, I guess, and like, part of it is luck. It's that I'm lucky. I'm lucky I didn't die. I'm lucky that my boyfriend called the ambulance that night. I'm lucky that I've had periods of staying away from alcohol for several months at a time. So I've also had some experience with it. And what finally convinced me to give it up was just being in the ER for I was in the ER for a couple days. And it was just a very psychedelic and kind of frightening experience because I was hallucinating a lot and seeing things where they weren't. And it's like the top tiles of the ceiling became TV screen. And then you'd see another one that's just 3D images moving over just the wall behind it. And that's another topic I'm going to go into is delirium tremens. But nobody really has to get delirium tremens. It just so happened that I did. Because, you know, it starts really fucking with your reality. That's why I'm going to devote a whole video to that, I think. To a bunch of these. So, you know, about 12 years ago, I ended up in jail for the first time. I ended up in the mental ward of an incarcerated in a correctional institution because I had said something that could possibly be construed as suicide. You know, I said I have nothing left to live for, so they put me right in there. And that wasn't the worst place either. It's actually, they make it really comfortable for people who are struggling with mental issues and stuff. And, you know, having been there, I was isolated for 3 days. The only thing I got was food. I asked for a book, nobody brought me a book. So I read the incarceration manual, and I ended up, you know, being able to interact constructively and respectfully with the officers, doctors. And, you know, I didn't know what I was going to do. Oh my God, I need to be making money right now. And that's one of the tragic parts of how out of control it can get. Is that you just begin to lose touch with what's okay to do and what reality is. And how lucky I was to have the situations and jobs that I had for such a long time. Gigs, teaching private lessons, and there's something just about having that musical experience with someone else too. It's a real beautiful high. But you lose all that, you know, when your license gets suspended and you end up in a jail cell and you have no control over what's going to happen. So, it was pretty weird. Not even a book, man, for 3 days. And I didn't need to end up there, you know? You don't need to end up there. And I love you. I love you. Especially if you're struggling with this right now. So, 11 days in jail after that, I lost all of my income. Teaching, playing gigs. I had just basically pissed off the world. That I pissed off my own world, man. And it was really shocking to look back on sometimes. Like, how could I have done that? Well, alcohol is insidious. Alcoholism is insidious. I mean, nothing against anyone who can have 1 or 2 drinks and stop there. God bless you. I think that's awesome. Just, I can't. So, my income's blown. And I ended up going to New Haven. I was living in the Hartford area, and I went up to New Haven by bus. I had a little money left over from a temp job. And then I ended up going to Yale to their science program where they were studying alcoholism. I mean, how beautiful is that, man? End up being part of the solution in science, you know, like just, you know, what your genetics were, your experiences, a whole number of things. All I know is it really helped me pay the rent that month. And then shortly after that, I got another temp job, long-term temp job, so it worked out. But, you know, at least I got to do that. And I showed myself that I can make money. You know, you don't want to be in situations like that, you as in general. But I found myself there and I got myself out. Didn't end up on the street or something. So, you know, I think it's really important to think about this stuff, man. Think about what you might find yourself unwilling to go through later. You know, I was pretty unwilling. I didn't want to do it, but I needed to do it. And I made it happen. And now my DNA is a part of science on the subject of alcoholism and what we can do to help people like that. You know? Oh my goodness, I'm going to stop it right here, but I'll be going on and doing a continuation video after this. I really thank you for tuning in. I just want to share my experiences so that I can help myself and others. And then we'll get the music and art part a little later. Alright. Peace.